I'm going to turn this back over to Tom and Lynn.
Okay. So if we look at the financials for the radio station, one thing you can see since 2008, the radio station has always operated at a loss. They've averaged revenues about $2 million, and they've lost $745,000 in 2008, $692 in 2009, and so on. Coming down to 2014, the loss was decreased to $363,000. If we look at the revenues that make up the radio station, see if we look at 2014, you see that tower rental is about $100,000 of the rentals. Fundraising, this is the contributions we get from the community, people that love to listen to jazz, about $747,000. And then grants, we get a grant from the Chicago Consumer Broadcasting Company for $192,000. And then COD support in 2014 was $570,000. And you can see that number has been declining each year. For GAAP purposes and for the grant, we have to do an indirect cost. It's a calculation that's required to apply overhead from the college to it. That number has averaged around $300,000 a year. So you will see that the radio station revenues for FY14 were $1.9 million. It's gone down a little bit, but it's primarily gone down because of the COD support has gone down, which is included in revenues. So you see COD support has gone down $300,000, and that's pretty much the decline in the radio station revenues. And just looking at a graph, this is probably pretty easy news to you by now that salaries and benefits comprise the largest component of the expenses. The indirect expenses are another 16%, and then we have depreciation, some other and contractual services of 11%. Through the first 6 months, our performance is improving. Revenues are staying about the same, but we're getting improvement on the cost side. And part of that improvement, obviously, is that there was a case of fraud, and expenses has been overstated for the past 16 years. So now that number is starting to come out. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the radio station fraud. As you've read in the paper, an alleged fraud at the college radio station was uncovered in late 2013. The state's attorney's office, working on prosecuting the case, asked the college not to publicly discuss this case while they were working on it. So the college respected the law, and we were prevented from talking about this situation publicly. And Tom, Joe, and I think this has been a very hard time period to have to hear so many misstatements come out and not be able to say anything. So tonight, we want to talk about some of the misstatements and correct them. There have been a lot of concerns raised. We have heard, how could the radio station receive a clean audit opinion when there was an alleged fraud? The fraud is equal to 4 times the annual radio station revenues. The college knew about this fraud for 2 years and did nothing. So these are all very good concerns, and based on the information that was out there, if I was in the public and I read these things, I would be concerned too, and I would believe this. Fraud is very serious regardless of the dollar amount. A system of internal controls encompasses the checks and balances that safeguard assets, detect errors, and help to deter fraud. No matter how well designed, internal controls can only provide reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. Collusion is a frequent way that internal controls are compromised. And for those of you that don't know what collusion is, it means that there can be somebody working with somebody that is committing a fraud. Now, this could be done on purpose. They could be gaining and earning some money, or it could just be that somebody in authority turns a blind eye, or just plain irresponsible actions. Most frauds are uncovered from employee tips. They're not uncovered through audits. In December of 2013, the college identified an alleged fraud at the radio station. The total amount of this alleged fraud was approximately $440,000 and spanned the course of a 16-year period, not 1 year. This means on average, the average impact to annual financial statements was $28,000 to the radio station, or about 1.4% of the annual radio station operating expenses. And for the college operating expenses, this was 0.02%. Okay, so how did we get a clean audit opinion? Okay, the financial audit was just completed when we discovered this, and the financial statements were issued to the college and had not yet been issued publicly. They were going to be issued at the January board meeting. The college notified the auditors of alleged fraud. So now the auditors were faced with a dilemma. They needed to do some due diligence. Was this fraud material to the financial statements? In other words, if somebody was relying on these statements, would they be adversely impacted by this event? So, for instance, say that you were a bank and say that this was a private institution and the bank had your financial statements. Would this knowledge deter the bank from making that loan? $28,000, 1.3%. In conducting an audit of financial statements, the overall objective of the auditor is to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. Misstatements are considered material if they, individually or in the aggregate, could reasonably be expected to influence the economic decisions of users made on the basis of these financial statements. Determining materiality is subjective. It's professional judgment by the auditor. A percentage is often applied to a chosen benchmark, such as operating expenses, in determining the materiality. In general, though, materiality thresholds for auditors varies, but generally speaking, most auditors would consider a range of 3 to 5% as material. So why fraud is concerning at any level? On an annual basis, this fraud fell far below the standard auditing materiality thresholds. In other words, the impact this amount had on the annual financials would not materially impact someone relying on these statements. Based on this due diligence, auditors were able to issue a clean opinion. Now,